I want to thank everyone for joining us for today's webcast, and I'm sorry to keep you waiting for a few minutes. Today we have Peter Merholz with Adaptive Path, and he's presenting Adaptive Path Subject to Change, creating great products and services for an uncertain world. Now, Peter is the president and one of the founders of Adaptive Path, and he's the author of the newly released book, which is also called Subject to Change. And Peter's work at Adaptive Path began with a focus on information architecture. Over time, he expanded his knowledge to include product strategy, user research, and practice development. Peter's thought leadership is demonstrated through his work, blogs, and essays for Adaptive Path, which you're probably familiar with. And if you didn't know already, you should know that Peter is the individual who coined the term blog back in 1999. I had the pleasure of hearing Peter speak at the Subject to Change book launch party earlier this week, so I know that you're in for a treat. And now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Peter.
Hello to all out there in webcast land. I am Peter Merholz. I'm president and one of the founders of Adaptive Path, and I'm going to be talking to you about our book, Subject to Change. This is a book that I co-wrote with three of my colleagues here at Adaptive Path, Brandon Schauer, David Verba, and Todd Wilkins. And so I want to acknowledge their contributions as well. This presentation is just going to hit some of the high points that we cover in the book and give you a taste of what to expect. So I will dive right in. So the reason we wrote this book is because it was clear that there's a lot in flux in the world of business, in terms of how to address the uncertainty and confusion that's currently happening. So we have a few examples. For example, the world of media is a mess, right? You have organizations like Craigslist taking classified advertising revenue away from newspapers. You're having, frankly, everyone taking a piece of the ads, right? Whether they're TV ads or magazine ads or news ads. And you have other media like blogs or YouTube taking away the audience. So you've got things like the media industry is in flux. Similarly, you have something like the music industry in a state of metamorphosis. In the United States, iTunes is the #1 retailer. What this means is that Apple, which up until about a year ago called itself a computer company, is now the #1 music retailer, ahead of people like Walmart and Best Buy, what we typically consider music retailers. And the record labels are losing their grip. We have an image here of Jay-Z, who instead of signing with the record label has signed with Live Nation, which is a concert promotion venue, and they're going to be handling the entirety of his musical output and career. Same thing with Madonna. So we're seeing artists moving away from recording labels and towards these concert promotions. And another example, the travel industry is turbulent. Now, we already know that with respect to things like booking travel, where travel agents have pretty much gone away in favor of sites like Orbitz or Expedia. But we're also now seeing that the experience of travel, flying with the airlines, is in a state of interesting flux, where, at least in the United States, the cheapest airlines are the ones that produce the best experiences, provide the most quality. So it's not simply a matter of paying more is what gets you a better experience. You pay less on Southwest or JetBlue, but you actually enjoy that flight better. So there's definitely this turbulence, this uncertainty that's happening in the market. And this is what we wanted to respond to with the book, because predicting the future has never been easy, but it also at this point has never been more difficult. So what we know is that predicting the future won't work. You can't really say where we're going to be in 5 to 10 years and just plan to get there. That won't work. Meeting about it won't work. Sitting in conference rooms talking about it won't work. What we argue that works is to adopt approaches that will allow you to succeed no matter which future comes to pass. You want to set your organization up to be adaptive and adaptable to whatever happens, and that's what we propose in our book, Subject to Change. So we now moving on to a brief history lesson that we think sheds some interesting light on this situation. In 1883, this was the state of photography, this camera on the left. In fact, this camera on the left was the leading edge of photography. There was no better camera out there. But this is the article that went, or this is the text that went with this photo. There are no less than 17 different parts that you have to pay attention to in order to simply take a picture. And what this meant is that at the time, photography was really only accessible to either professionals or ardent hobbyists. But there was a man who had a vision. George Eastman had this idea for a camera where all that you need to do is press the button, and we, his company, will do the rest. That camera was the original Kodak camera, which spawned the Eastman Kodak empire, which dominated photography for over 100 years. And what he realized is that instead of having people need to engage in 17 steps in order to take a picture, just have them engage in 3. Pull the cord, turn the key, press the button. He was able to simplify the experience of photography so that it was no longer simply accessible to professionals, but to anybody who wanted to take a picture. And the genius in that wasn't making a simpler camera. That was part of it. But you still have all that complexity of printing and developing and processing film. So the genius was in turning a product, this Kodak camera, into a service. With the product, you press the button. With the service, Eastman Kodak, this is an image of the Eastman Kodak factory in Rochester, New York in the 1880s. Through the service, they do the rest. And what he realized is you need to stop thinking about your products, as these standalone entities that you put into the world. And instead, you need to think about them as touch points, as entry points into a system, which can provide a service. And what this actually does is this extends the relationship that Kodak now has with its customers. It's not simply going to a store and buying a camera, because every time you wanted to get your pictures developed and printed, you're once again re-engaging with Kodak. So you develop this longer-term relationship with them as a service. Now, this story is important because for a number of years, Kodak had this focus on customer experience, and it's what made them successful. And in more recent years, the reason that they failed, the reason that they've stumbled, is because they lost sight of that focus. They got too caught up in chasing the revenue, which was in the paper processing. And when the digital revolution came, Kodak actually had in their R&D labs, they had done a lot of interesting work with digital, but the business couldn't imagine moving to digital because the share of their profits were coming from paper. And so they were unable to transition with the audience, with their customers, and that has led to them being essentially an also-ran in the digital photography market, whereas they were easily the world leader when it came to film photography. So one of the things that's important to keep in mind as we're thinking about the development of products, and I'm guessing this being an O'Reilly-oriented audience, this diagram will be somewhat familiar because it's typically, it's one of the ways to think about software, think about software development. And typically those of us who are involved in the development of software products think about it in a way similar to this. At your core, you have data, you have the material, the raw material that people are going to be engaging with. You wrap that with some logic, with some programming, so that you can do interesting things with that data, and then you provide a user interface that allows access to the logic and then to the data. Now, those of us who build software systems, we understand this. What we have to keep in mind, though, is that our audience doesn't think about it this way at all. Our audience thinks about it in one way. There's the user interface, there's that which they see and engage with, and then everything else behind it is magic, right? It's pulling rabbits out of hats. They don't know how it works, they don't want to know how it works, and they don't need to know how it works. And the problem is, we oftentimes in our product development, we design from the inside out. We start with the data that we have, and we work our way out to an interface that allows people access to the data. And what we need to do, we need to invert that. We need to start with the experience that